Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am really looking forward to my conversation today with a longtime friend, Vivian Sayward. She is the founder of Vivacity Sportswear. It is an inclusive women's clothing line designed right here in San Diego. Vivian has built a team of experts in design. And what you'll find interesting is she actually doesn't have a background in design. Her background is primarily in biotech, which we'll talk about, and how she went from biotech into the world of apparel. She does design, development, manufacturing, all end to end, and develops these beautiful products. The fabrics are very innovative, sustainable. It is an incredible line that women can wear from workout or the golf course to the rest of their day. Very elegant apparel, something that is very different on the market. And really that's as you'll hear in her story, was part of what she was seeking and couldn't find. So she went to develop it herself. She's actually recently launched an extension of that brand because through all of her experience in developing this line, she realizes there are thousands of others out there that struggle with how do they get their product to market. So she's developed a service with her team to help others develop their product through some private label services. We'll talk about that. So folks don't go through the same mistakes that she really had to go through in developing her line. So with that, welcome to the show today, Vivian.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, let's dive in and give our listeners the story behind the story, so to speak. So take us back. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Just take us along your career path, and then we'll get in and dig in on your business and how you started that and where you're going, all that good stuff. So, but first, take us back.
Yeah. Well, I am a daughter. I'm a first-generation American. My family's all from Colombia, South America. My parents met in the States. They both immigrated separately to New York, and that's where they met and fell in love. And 3 months later, they were married. And about a year later, I was born. So definitely came from quite honestly, very fearless people who made a life for themselves and their family. My brother and myself. We were both born in New York. I lived on the East Coast until I was about 9, and then my dad once again got tired of cold winters and wanted my mom had some health issues, so he packed us all up and sold the house, and we moved across the country to California, and we started all over again as a family. So I think that fearlessness was just something, just examples from both parents. So I continued on my education here. I ended up actually after high school, I ended up going to school back east at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Spent 3 years there, did my junior year abroad in Paris, which was amazing.
Nice.
Great opportunity there. And then I came back to California. I didn't necessarily want to stay. I love the East Coast, but started trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had a liberal arts education, so I've always been curious, and I love to read and I love to learn. So that was great, but at the same time, it's a little hard to focus when you're starting up in a career path and you have, student loans and everything else going on. So I actually started in the high tech world. I started in finance, accounting. It was a job that turned from an internship in the summer to a full-time job. And I worked at Western Digital in Irvine, California. And from there, went into healthcare. And I ended up at Baxter Healthcare, still in finance, I knew it was a great background for me, but I knew that's not where I wanted my career to go. I wanted to do other things. So I started the MBA, the part-time MBA program at UC Irvine, where I did graduate there. And from that, I really transferred from finance accounting into business development. And that's where I really feel like that's a big chunk of my career. And this is all corporate. I've worked at different biotech companies like Amgen, Thousand Oaks. I worked at a company based here in San Diego, but they had facilities in Irvine called Gencia. And that's where I got really got my appetite for business development, strategizing, market research, working with these amazing people throughout the world. Actually, some amazing scientists that even though I didn't have a science background, I love learning and I love listening to people's stories. So, and amazingly enough, people love to talk about what they do, especially if they're passionate about it. So, I have to say, even though I've had a good education, I've learned on the job incredibly. All my work experiences have been that way, where I've been kind of thrown into the fire, and I've had to, sink or swim, as they say. And I've been able to do that because I really enjoy it. It really fuels me and it really impassions me. So I know I've needed that. And I've realized throughout my career, working mostly in corporate up until that point in time, the areas where I really thrived. And I thrived in areas where I had to learn that way, where if it wasn't, I don't like to be pigeonholed. And maybe this is part of my background. Maybe it's the example from my family, because my dad's an entrepreneur. And has built up a business, a manufacturing business of his own in Orange County. It's something where you're learning on the go, and which I love. Yeah. So from there, that's how I ended up in San Diego. I met John, my husband, and he didn't want to move from San Diego. He's from Boston. So I ended up down in Boston or San Diego, excuse me.
Yeah. Instead of going back to the East Coast. Yeah, it's understandable.
Exactly.
It's understandable.
He did not want to go back.
Yes, but yeah, weather-wise, we a little bit better out here. So perfect. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, I mean, you've had an incredible career path, and just knowing you over the years, this is no offense to anybody in finance, but you don't strike me as the finance girl. I mean, you are so gregarious and getting stuck in the finance department. I'm glad you moved out into business development and strategic planning and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Anyhow, so I want to share the story, if you would, of the way you came up with your company, Vivacity Sportswear.
Yeah, it's definitely one of these stories where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I knew I was kind of transitioning out of corporate, and I was consulting for especially after I moved to San Diego. I was still in the court, obviously I had all my connections in biotech pharma. I was consulting for other companies, other startups. Which was fine, but I really wanted to build something on my own. I loved that experience when I was at other companies, especially smaller companies where we were building things. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I've always been active. And I started playing golf. My husband's an avid golfer. He's been playing since he was a kid. And so I started playing golf with him, started learning the game. But I would go out there and I just couldn't find anything to wear. I hated what was out there for women. I was offended by the way it was being marketed to women or not. So finally one day, my husband turned to me and said, do something about it then. If this really bothers you, then do something about it.
Shut up and do something about it. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. He's like, please don't say it that way.
No, I'm teasing.
I would never say that to you. And
no,
I'm like, I know.
Of course.
No, I know. So I call him my muse.
Yes.
Even though he wouldn't look it in a sport. But so I started researching that. I thought, yeah, you're right. It's a problem. If I'm having this issue, are other people women like me having this issue? What's out there? Who's out there? What are they doing? How are they doing it or not? So that's how Vivacity began. I started, and again, I was not confident because as far as starting this, because this is way brand new for me. I do not design. I don't sew. I can't draw a straight line. I just know what I like. And I know, and I've been active in other, I was a competitive swimmer in high school and college, and I've run a lot of races, and
no, not just a lot of races. How many marathons have you run, Vivian?
Almost 40. Actually.
Okay, all right.
As my knees and ankles can attest to it all. But anyway,
pretty incredible. Yeah. So very, very active lifestyle.
But you know, and I knew there was fabrics out there that were not at this point in time not being utilized for golf, especially for women. So that's how I started. I started talking to people. I knew someone who was in design, in a friend that I had met through some other friends, who had been in the triathlete world, and she designed and manufactures pieces and so forth. So I started working with her for a bit, and I learned quite a bit. That was really great training for me. And I learned that there was a garment manufacturing ecosystem right here in San Diego that had survived all the offshoring of the 80s and 90s. And these folks knew what they were doing. They do beautiful work, and they had survived by sheer will and their talents and perseverance. So that's how I started learning. When I realized, though, with this friend with whom I've been designing and working with, so I soon realized that she was not comfortable in what we were trying to do. And quite honestly, her vision and my vision were very different. And she wasn't willing to take the plunge, shall we say. Yeah. And I really wanted to create something more than what she was comfortable with, which was fine. And I'm glad I learned that and understood that early on. So we parted ways. And unfortunately, the friendship didn't last. So note to everyone about partnerships, be very careful.
Be careful.
Very, very careful.
I know. We need to do a whole podcast on that. That's, you know, it's tricky.
It's very, very tricky. I mean, obviously some work, but anyway. So I started from scratch. I didn't even really care for the designs she had come up with. They were all the same stuff that I was seeing. So I really just a lot of trial and error with talking to people, learning about what they did, you know, networking. Hera Hub was starting at this point in time, which was a godsend for me. Thank you so much, Felina. That through all these connections, I was able to finally connect with my who's still my creative director, Christina Zeller, who's amazing background and experience, and really build up this connection of people, of this ecosystem of designers, pattern makers, folks who make the markers for cutting fabric, the fabric cutters, and the sewers here in San Diego. And that's how Vivacity began.
Amazing. So I want to dive into, we're just going to use that phrase throughout this podcast here. I want to dive into the needs as you grew Vivacity, you saw in the plus size market. Speak to that if you would.
Yeah, sure. So when I started Vivacity, and I was like testing the market out, my proof of concept early on. I ended up doing trunk shows at pro shops, at golf shops, at country clubs locally in San Diego. It was a great way for me to kind of figure out what was going on, making sure that I was meeting the needs of the customer, or hopefully exceeding them, and learning about that. And I kept on running into, and even after I was, well on my way of, being introduced to different markets and so forth, I kept on running into women who would say, your stuff is so beautiful, but please, can you make something for me? We're not all, we want to look cute, we want to be comfortable, but you're not carrying a size 16 for us. You're not, and we end up wearing these men's shirts or men's jackets that make it look even more boxy, and they're not comfortable and they're not made for us. So that really struck me. Here I was focused on women, and maybe women on more of the misses sizes and so forth, which is fine, which is great. But I wasn't, I was ignoring this other market that really wanted these pieces. So I worked closely with a few people here and some influencers, and designed some pieces. Started slowly, but really took what we had already and recreated pieces that worked well for these women of larger sizes. When you have they use these, again, this is a generalized, very, very statistically, it doesn't always work, but if the CDC continues to say that the average American woman is about 5'3" and 140, 160 pounds, I believe, in a size 14, 16, and most brands don't go past size 12 or 14, we have an issue.
Yeah.
And we're missing a whole marketplace where, beyond neglecting a group of women who want to look cute, who want to be comfortable, and want to be active. Yeah. It's so that's where I started, and I really focused on, even in my advertising and so forth, incorporating it. Really not trying to make it such, here's our misses sizes. Oh, by the way, here's some plus size too. Really being part of all the messaging and so forth, the inclusion part, because that's really important to me.
Absolutely.
For many reasons.
Absolutely. Yeah. So glad you have, been able to support, all ends of the market, so to speak. And because, as you said, I mean, these are real women, exactly. And most women are not a size 4 or a 6, right? And so where do they go to find things that are beautiful, fit well, they feel comfortable in? So thank you for doing that. Talk about, in more recent, as your business has evolved, I know you have gotten into the cruise ship market. Talk about that.
Yeah. So when I was selling in these resorts and pro shops and stuff like that, women would, more women would come to me and say, I just wore your leggings and your beautiful jacket on our overseas trip to Europe or to Japan or whatever. True story. I had a woman who, a friend of my brother's, my brother who spent many years in Japan. She literally came to one of our shows or something like that. She bought out all these different pieces, and she wore one of our crystal pieces. We have pieces with crystal zippers and whatnot, very a little bit of bling there. She wore that all the way home. She took a picture the next day at the airport at LAX. She took another picture in Narita Airport when she arrived, etc. So I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So these are pieces that, because our fabrics are for the most part, 4-way stretch fabrics. They're breathable, they're comfortable, they're technical fabrics. They're the fabrics you'll see in yoga lines like Lululemon or Lorna Jane or whatnot. They work well. They're comfortable. They fit through they'll handle curves, which is great, and then they wash well, and they're easy to care for. So I thought, wow, there's got to be something else going on. So I kept on reading about cruise ships, or about the aging market, about how people, the cruise industry, for example, that is growing 9-10% per year, and more ships are being built every year, introduced and so forth. So I did some research. My research background came back, and I found some connections with some buying groups. And once again, I did the same thing. I started out with trunk shows on a couple of the higher end ships, and that's where we've now built up this really nice relationship with one of the major buying groups in the country for cruise ships.
Phenomenal. I love it. I love it. I also want you to talk a little bit, and before we pivot the conversation to some of the work you've been doing with other brands, Talk about your passion for sustainability, sustainable fabric, use of certain fabrics that, like I know you have a shirt that's made out of plastic bottles, for example. So talk
Right.
about that.
Well, I've been, as I've been learning about this industry, and coming to my horror,
Mm.
coming to find out that the garment industry in general is probably the second highest, most polluting industry after oil.
Jeez.
And there's many reasons beyond that, beyond the way the fabrics are treated, are dyed, chemicals that have been used in the past, which ends up in the water system, in the groundwater, et cetera, unfortunately. Then there's the more of the turn from cotton to these technical fabrics, which perform beautifully. These plastic-based, polymer-based fabrics that do not break down. They just don't. They're not biodegradable. So you have those issues coupled with fast fashion has grown tremendously. The H&Ms, the Zaras, et cetera, of the world. Especially I should say, in Walmart, what's being offered in Walmart and so forth. You buy a shirt, you pay $10 for it, and it wears down after a few uses, and then you just throw it away. Well, those pieces end up in landfills. They just don't go anywhere else. And even donating clothing, as much as we'd love to donate as we can to Goodwill or other places, they can't use up all those clothes, and eventually those too end up in the landfill. It's sad but true. So I'm just, this bothers me.
Yeah.
I want to leave a legacy for the next generations, future generations. And I started researching a bit more, and some of the fabric vendors I use are very innovative. I've been really, really lucky. Some of the work they do is pretty amazing. They're very much into trying to continuously improve their processes to make them more sustainable, less more environmentally friendly. So that's one aspect of it. So we've been working with different types of fabrics, and the more fabrics we find, for example, this fabric we've been using now, made out of recycled plastic bottles and polymer. In spandex there, it's an amazing fabric, and we've sold out of that. It's been phenomenal for many reasons. That's one aspect. We've got another fabric right now with it's using Tencel, which is made out of, it's derived out of pretty much a wood pulp. So the wood's been processed, the pulp that's been left out after the end of the process is integrated in right now to make this fabric, and it's a beautiful fabric as well. So really continuing on that and trying to find, really networking and connecting with people that are looking at new technologies, new ways of sustainability. So that's what we're trying to do, and trying to continue that approach and really trying to fine tune it within our own processes as well.
That's great. Yeah. And I know you're taking all of this knowledge and experience over 8 years into now helping other people, because, when you do something well, people flock to you and say, I need help. Will you help me? Can I pick your brain?
Right.
And you want to help everybody, but you can't, just dump everything else on your plate and help. So you've created a service business called VFit to help others who are looking to, bring their product to market. So talk about maybe an example or two of some folks that you've helped through the process of getting their products made.
Yeah, this kind of started out, we've been referred to from other people, like, oh, you have this line. We have a friend or a colleague or who wants to do this. So we actually designed a dance through this, and this was completely out of left field. This, we worked with a brand. It's a group that teaches a dance type of exercise throughout the world. And we helped them develop a small dance line collection for them, from which I was pleased to say they recognized it right away, from misses to plus size. So we were able to do that quickly, based on, we had the connections, we could design for it quickly. We can, and we turned that around for them within, I would say, about 12 months, which is not, from starting from nothing to having, a few hundred pieces out there all at once. So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
So that was great to see that and help them build that out. And then more recently, we've been working with a couple of, just starting out right now with people who are finding a woman that, because her daughter had special needs, developed kind of a unitard type of product.
Like almost like an undergarment type scenario, is it?
Yeah, I guess her daughter, and there's others who are very tactile sensitive and very anxious, and her daughter would have issues with almost peeling her clothes off. And as her daughter was getting older, she didn't want her to completely. Yeah. So having this very soft fabric next to her skin, and preventing and being comfortable, being it for her to be that way, but feel comforted as well. There's studies, obviously with newborns and so forth, being wrapped up, just swaddled, and that's the same concept with this product. So we're helping her design, better design it and so forth, because it was a need she found that she had, and she found on her own other parents facing the same issues with their children. Yeah. So we're helping her with that right now. So that's for me, that's amazing. Yeah. I feel really good about that.
Good. Yeah. Well, I have one more question for you, Vivian, before we talk about what's next for Vivacity and VFit. And it's a topic that's in the media a lot right now. Yes. And I know you, as part of, you have been a spokesperson with the National Retail Federation, done a lot of speaking, with them about a variety of issues in the apparel industry. But the one that's front and center at the moment is China and tariffs and what some folks are calling a trade war with China. So how has that, just speaking from, kind of the person on the other end of the line, so to speak, if you will, because a lot of the media talks about, these huge companies and, why we have to do this, but how has it affected you in particular as a small business owner?
There's some inputs that come from China. Again, people don't realize we are a global economy. As much as we would love to source everything locally and everything else, that's not the way things have turned. No. We have manufacturing is expensive here. We're developing other things, and we've moved on. Not necessarily not making things, but in other areas. A lot of people left, and again, a lot of these big companies left the States because of the higher labor costs, et cetera, back in the 80s and the 90s and so forth, went offshoring. China said, hey, we have space, we have labor, come on in. And that's what they did. Now, there's been companies were just interested, and we're talking all the major ones, we're talking high-end fashion lines, we're talking so many people. They came in, especially China, Southeast Asia, et cetera, opened their doors. They transferred over their production, obviously much cheaper labor costs and so forth, but without any consideration as to how the workers are being treated, working conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just they were getting cheaper product costs from there. So there's that one end. And now with these trade wars and so forth, that you may not see the costs go up right away because it takes time to get these inputs, but you're talking threads. Maybe I'm not getting all my fabrics from China. I'm not. Yeah. But I've got threads. I've got certain labels. I've got, there could be some packaging. There could, all this. even some of the manufacturers, textile manufacturers, maybe they don't manufacture in China, but they may be getting some inputs from China.
Yeah.
So that all ends up coming in, and that all ends up, those costs go up. That goes up for the manufacturer here, and let's say if you're manufacturing wherever you may be manufacturing and getting it over to the States. In my case, we're manufacturing a lot here in San Diego, so we're getting those costs are starting to go up a little bit, and then eventually you're dealing with margins that are tight enough. Sadly, it's eventually going to be passed down to the consumer because there's no way you can sustain a business model like that. And I'm a little more flexible. There's so many other people who have developed products, are having their product being manufactured in China, and they're scrambling right now. Scrambling. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to sort of two things I heard you say. Number one, we're a global economy, whether you want to believe it or not. As you said, all these parts and pieces are coming from all over the world. And so, yes, you can say your product is made in America, and it is, but there's so much more that goes into it that is complex, and it's not like you can pivot next week and find a new label manufacturer and run around and do all these things. Like you said, it takes time, and I think obviously the intention behind this, as I understand, is what I'm hearing is let's make this uncomfortable enough for U.S. companies that they do bring their manufacturing back to the U.S. But to your point, a lot of those facilities are gone, to build a new facility to, and train the people. It's a whole new world in manufacturing than it was, 30 years ago with technology, and that's expensive to invest in. It's not like we can just turn the switch on these factories and, fill them back up again and start making stuff.
And to train the labor force to do this and the interim and so forth. We have issues trying to find trained contractors, sewers and whatnot. They're really hard to find because it's a specialized skill that is not being taught anymore. So it's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this gets sorted out sooner than later. Thank you for speaking to that. So, well, Viv, what's on the horizon for your business?
Well, we've been, thankfully, we've been continuing to grow Vivacity on this resort travel side of things, and that's what we'll continue to look forward to. And at the same time, we've been getting, as you mentioned earlier, we have been getting more requests, and interestingly enough, some people coming back from China, so they're manufacturing from China, are looking for manufacturing more local. So we're getting a lot of queries there about, and again, a lot of these folks who have been manufacturing, let's say in China or in other areas, who, they're trying to get their product done, they want to switch, but these folks will not give them any technical packages, i.e. their patterns or designs or anything like that. So they have to start from scratch. So we're working with a few groups right now. This has all happened within less than 6 months. We have gotten a whole bunch of new groups of companies and so forth, or startups, looking to redevelop or develop their product in manufacturers. So we're helping them right now, and it's something that we really enjoy doing. I've got a good team here, and we're thinking that this may be our future, helping others get it going and build it out for them.
That's great.
And more importantly, that they own their own intellectual property.
Right.
Because not ours, it's theirs.
True. Yeah. And as much as, we don't want to see these trade wars, it's bringing more awareness to this and consciousness that you're right. You can, your materials, your patterns can be held hostage, in any country. China's not always known for their most prudent business practices. So it is interesting.
it's really, really interesting, and it's not only China. And I don't want to pin. It's not China's not the evil person here all the time or anything like that. But we're even seeing that from other from companies, even in LA, for example. which I find appalling, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not good business practice at all. So
well, thank you for the work you're doing, Vivian. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, please just look out for us online at vivacitysportswear.com on our contact page. And also we're on Instagram, of course. Instagram and Facebook and Vivacity Sportswear.
Perfect. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your story with us, Vivian.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.